I want to thank the panelists and for excellent opening statements. I want to align myself with the comments by Representative Rooney. One of the fundamental principles of a free society and a free economy is private property ownership, and the understanding that if you invest money in real estate, develop a home or a business property, or even develop a business in general, that you own that property and you have some sort of free assurances that it won't be confiscated by a government, whether it's this government or a government abroad, and if you're an American investor. And so the claims are clear that Americans and Cuban Americans have. The Foreign Claims Settlement Commission has adjudicated a lot of these, as we've heard. So now we see the Obama administration acting in defiance of the 1996 Libertad Act, and really in defiance, I think, of what the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission has proven through its adjudication. And so what is the role of the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission if we're just going to ignore its findings, if we're not going to apply those findings to future negotiations and normalization of trade? So the question I have to you is, what role do you expect the FCSC to play in relation to the State Department's prioritization of the resolution of almost 6,000 certified claims? What role is the FCSC playing now with the administration? Mr. Tamaga.
Traditionally, when those negotiations begin in other situations, in previous settlement discussions, the Commission plays a technical supporting role. The lead negotiating, all the negotiating is done by the State Department.
But it sounds to me like the State Department's ignoring.
Well, they have put out some public statements to the effect of that this is on their list of things to discuss with the Cubans government, and but they have not, as of yet, well, as far as the public is aware, public record is aware, began those discussions yet.
Right. So there's been 2 Cuba programs with FCSC.
That's correct.
Almost 9,000 claims have been brought before those 2 programs. Should there be a third?
It would depend on, traditionally, under international law, each country adjudicates the claims of its own citizens, and under international law, it was citizenship at the time of the taking. That is under international law. It's, the U.S. Congress is not bound by it, and they could choose to interpret or create a program that would go beyond international law and adjudicate claims for claims of individuals that were not American citizens at the time. But one must be aware that there are millions of those.
Right.
That would encompass
millions of those that were Cubans at the time the property was seized that are now Cuban Americans because they've immigrated here.
Yes.
But
yes.
The way I see it, they still have claims on property back in Cuba that was seized by the government when businesses were nationalized. Go ahead, sir.
Traditionally, this issue of property under property ownership interruption by communist governments have happened throughout history, and every country has had to create some sort of reconciliation commission. This problem ultimately will have to be dealt with by the Cuban government.
Which doesn't seem willing at this point in time to make any concessions. They're just saying, okay, we'll open up our relations, but we're not going to change our principles of economic freedom or the lack thereof. We're not going to give the Cuban people more freedom of speech, more freedom to peacefully assemble, more freedom to worship, more freedom to the Internet and access to free press, no information sharing. They're being kept in the dark. They had their property seized, and yet the Castro brothers are sitting there making demands on the United States government if we want to go back in there and normalize relations. The Cubans aren't doing anything. And so just a follow-up question, do you think the Obama administration's policy changes on Cuba will have any effect on the status of these 6,000 claims?
I am hopeful but guarded that they will be taken up between the 2 countries.
Oh, we're all hopeful.
It's up to the Congress to make them happen.
Amen to that.
Because it is the Congress that would need to lift the remaining elements of the embargo that have not already been lifted. And if Congress refuses to lift the embargo until these claims are paid, then these claims will be paid if Cuba wants access to the U.S. market.
And honestly, I think the congressmen and women that I talk to believe we ought to keep the embargo in place until some of this is addressed, but I don't have a poll on that. Mr. Bradley, would you like to add anything to this discussion? If not, I'm going to move on to the ranking member.
I'd just say, speaking as a private citizen, I am aware that in past situations, such as I would point to Vietnam in particular, Vietnam still is a communist country, but it recognized and certainly Senator Helms played a big role in insisting that property claims were taken up early in the progress of arriving at normalization between Vietnam and the United States. And so that same analogy should apply here, in my view. Right. That same mindset should apply.
Well, I appreciate it. Now, I'm going to turn to the ranking member. As you can see, I'm a little passionate about this issue because I believe that the Castro brothers are making immense demands on the United States for this normalization, and the administration is just giving in over and over and over without asking for concessions from the Cuban government if we're going to go forward with this. More concessions for the Cuban people, which I have a heart for. And you heard some of the things I talked about. But I think that, I go back to Tom Rooney's comments, some of the fundamental principles of a very free society and free economy is the right to own property. And understanding that I own this parcel and you own that parcel. And I've got fee simple claims to this. And so I think this is an important aspect that I'm glad we're doing this hearing today, because before we go forward anymore, this issue has to be addressed, and I'm glad we're addressing it today. I'll turn to the ranking member.